Welcome to a deep dive into a chapter of church history that's might be a little unsettling, but definitely fascinating for a devout Catholic like yourself. Witchcraft and how it was understood by the church historically and theologically.
Yeah, it's a topic that evokes a mix of curiosity and maybe some discomfort as we try to reconcile our faith with some of the things that happened in the past.
You've given us a really interesting mix of sources to work with for this deep dive. Excerpts from the Malleus Maleficarum itself, some papal bulls from around that time, and even some modern Catholic commentary.
Right.
Our mission here is to carefully unpack these sources and try to understand what they tell us about the anxieties and beliefs that shaped perceptions of witchcraft, particularly within the Catholic world.
And for someone like yourself, seeking a deeper understanding of your faith, exploring how the church grappled with this concept of witchcraft can be really illuminating. We'll be looking at the Malleus Maleficarum, not just in terms of its infamous reputation, but also within its historical context, exploring its theological underpinnings, and even addressing some of the misconceptions that surround it.
So to start, let's set the stage.
Okay.
Our central text here is the Malleus Maleficarum, which translates to the Hammer of Witches, written in 1486 by Heinrich Kramer, who used the name Instatoris, and Jacob Springer. This book has a pretty intense reputation.
It does. I think it's safe to say that the Malleus is often viewed as a symbol of the witch hunts, representing a time when fear and superstition really seemed to dominate. But to truly understand its impact, we need to consider the historical context surrounding its creation. It was a time of great upheaval in Europe with plagues, wars, and social unrest. This atmosphere of fear and uncertainty greatly influenced how people perceived threats like witchcraft.
And just a few years before the Malleus, in 1484, Pope Innocent VIII issued a papal bull called Summis Desiderantes Effectivus, which specifically condemned witchcraft and gave inquisitors like Kramer and Springer the authority to combat it.
Yeah, that's a key piece of the puzzle. This papal bull wasn't just a condemnation. It essentially legitimized the witch hunts and added to the fear surrounding witchcraft. It's a stark reminder that even within the church, ideas and practices could be influenced by the prevailing social and cultural anxieties of the time.
So getting into the Malleus itself, we see that it's structured in three parts. Part one sets the stage by laying out the theological foundation for understanding witchcraft. It argues that witchcraft is essentially a heresy stemming from a pact with the devil.
Now, it's crucial to remember that in the late 15th century, the belief in demonic pacts wasn't just folklore, it was a serious theological concept. Thinkers like Thomas Aquinas, whose works were highly influential within the church, had written extensively about the power of demons, and this belief permeated all levels of society. So within this context, the idea of witches making pacts with the devil fit into the existing theological framework.
Part two then gets into the specifics of what witches were believed to be capable of, their methods and powers. The Malleus really goes into detail, describing things like causing impotence, creating illusions, and all sorts of things that must have seemed terrifying to people back then.
And it's here that we see the Malleus relying heavily on anecdotal evidence stories and confessions, some of which were likely obtained under duress. While modern scholarship casts serious doubt on the accuracy of these accounts in the 15th century, these stories would have been perceived as evidence of the very real threat posed by witches.
It's interesting how the Malleus, even as it presents these fantastical accounts, tries to ground its arguments in what it considered to be a rational, even scientific framework. It almost creates this taxonomy of evil, categorizing types of witches and their powers, and even laying out legal procedures for handling accusations.
That's a really insightful observation. The Malleus reflects a broader trend in medieval thought scholasticism, which emphasized using logic and reason to understand the world, including the spiritual realm. Of course, the problem is that the Malleus's logic is based on prejudice and misinformation. So even as it tries to present this systematic approach, it ends up reinforcing harmful stereotypes.
And one of the most disturbing aspects of the Malleus is its undeniable focus on women as the primary perpetrators of witchcraft. It goes to great lengths to explain why women are supposedly more susceptible to the devil's influence.
Yes, the misogyny in the Malleus is impossible to ignore. It draws on existing societal anxieties about women, portraying them as weaker in faith, more prone to deception, and easily swayed by their emotions. It even goes so far as to say that women's inherent inferiority makes them prime targets for demonic temptation.
As a Catholic, I find it difficult to read those passages now without feeling a sense of shame and sadness. It's a stark reminder that even within a faith that preaches love and compassion, deeply flawed and harmful ideas can take root.
It's certainly a sobering reminder that we need to be constantly vigilant against prejudice and discrimination, even within our own traditions. It's essential to read these historical texts with a critical eye, recognizing that they reflect the biases and limitations of their time.
Now, the Malleus doesn't just describe the problem of witchcraft. It also offers solutions. And a central part of that is this concept of exorcism, the idea that demonic influence can be countered through spiritual means.
Right, and the church has always acknowledged the reality of spiritual warfare, the idea that there are forces of evil at work in the world that we need to be aware of and protect ourselves against. The Malleus reflects that understanding, providing very detailed instructions for identifying and addressing demonic influence, particularly in cases of suspected witchcraft.
But wasn't the Malleus ultimately endorsed by the church? How do we reconcile that with the idea that it doesn't represent modern Catholic views on witchcraft?
That's a crucial question. While the Malleus did receive papal approval at the time, it's important to understand that the Church's understanding of these issues has evolved significantly. Modern Catholic teachings emphasize critical thinking, discernment, and a reliance on prayer and the sacraments rather than resorting to superstitious practices.
So we're not suggesting that anyone should use the Malleus as a guidebook for dealing with suspected witchcraft today.
Absolutely not. It's a historical document that needs to be understood within its context. We can learn from it, but we should not uncritically accept its premises or its methods.
The Malleus also goes into great detail about the legal procedures involved in investigating and prosecuting suspected witches. It outlines a very specific step-by-step approach that inquisitors were expected to follow.
And this legalistic approach reflects the central role that the Church played in society at the time. The Church wasn't just a religious institution. It had a significant influence on legal matters as well. And while some of the methods described in the Malleus might seem harsh and unjust by today's standards, they need to be understood within the context of medieval legal practices.
It's striking how even as the Malleus talks about demonic powers and spiritual warfare, it also delves into very practical concerns like how to gather evidence, conduct interrogations, and even how to handle financial matters related to witch trials.
Yes, and this attention to detail highlights the way that the Malleus attempts to blend spiritual concerns with legal and administrative processes. It's trying to create a comprehensive system for addressing the perceived threat of witchcraft, covering everything from theological arguments to practical guidelines for action.
But even with these attempts to create a system, it's hard to ignore the fact that the methods advocated by the Malleus often led to the persecution of innocent people. The witch hunts that followed cast a long shadow on this period of church history.
It's undeniable that the Malleus played a role in the tragic witch hunts of the early modern period, and it's something that we as Catholics need to grapple with. It's a dark chapter that we can't simply ignore or dismiss.
So how do we approach this book and its legacy as Catholics today? What can we learn from it, and how do we reconcile it with our faith?
I think one of the most important things we can do is to approach the Malleus with a critical and discerning eye. We need to read it within its historical context, recognizing the anxieties and fears that shaped its worldview.
So it's not about condemning the church or rejecting our faith.
Not at all. It's about understanding that even within a divinely inspired institution, human fallibility can lead to errors and even tragedies. It's about acknowledging the complexities of our history and learning from the mistakes of the past.
You know, as we've been talking about the Malleus, I keep coming back to this idea of perspective, how our understanding of the world, even our understanding of faith, is shaped by the time and place we live in.
Yeah, that's such a vital point. The Malleus, with its blend of theological arguments, folklore, and legal procedures, really captures a specific moment in European history. It reflects not just the anxieties of that era, but also the limitations of their knowledge and understanding.
And for a modern Catholic audience, that raises some interesting questions. If the church, with all its wisdom and tradition, could be so profoundly mistaken about something like witchcraft, does that mean it could be wrong about other things as well?
That's a question that each of us has to grapple with in our own journey of faith. The church as a human institution is not immune to error, but that doesn't invalidate the core tenets of our faith or diminish the power of God's grace.
So how do we reconcile those two things, the fallibility of human institutions and the infallibility of divine revelation?
Well, it's a delicate balance. It requires us to approach our faith with both humility and discernment. We need to be open to new knowledge and understanding, recognizing that our interpretations of scripture and tradition can evolve over time.
So it's not about blindly accepting everything we're told, but rather engaging in a process of critical reflection, asking questions, and seeking truth.
Exactly. Faith isn't about shutting down our minds. It's about opening our hearts and minds to the mystery of God's love and seeking to understand His will for our lives. And sometimes that means acknowledging that even the church as a human institution can make mistakes.
It's been really eye-opening to delve into these sources with you. It's made me think about the Malleus Maleficarum, not just as a historical curiosity, but as a cautionary tale, a reminder of what can happen when fear, superstition, and rigid thinking take hold.
I agree. The Malleus, with all its disturbing elements, serves as a powerful reminder of the dangers of religious extremism, the importance of critical thinking, and the need for compassion and justice in all matters of faith.
So for our listener who's been on this deep dive with us, what would you say is the most important takeaway from all of this?
I would say that the Malleus offers us a valuable opportunity for reflection and self-examination. It challenges us to confront the darker aspects of our history and to ask ourselves how we as Catholics can learn from the mistakes of the past and strive to live out our faith in a way that reflects God's love and mercy.
And perhaps it even prompts a question that goes beyond the specific content of our sources. If the church could be so wrong about witchcraft, what other areas might require fresh perspective or re-examination in light of modern understanding and values? That's something I think is worth pondering as we continue to navigate the complexities of faith in our modern world.
It's a thought-provoking question indeed. And with that, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive. Hopefully it's provided you with a deeper understanding of the Malleus Maleficarum, its historical context, and its implications for Catholics today.
Thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery. Until next time, may your faith be a source of strength, guidance, and hope as you navigate the challenges and complexities of our modern world.